All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us on our latest edition of our OIE meetups. This is the latest in our sort of mini series on the foundations of OIE. Today's session is going to be focused on authenticators in OIE. So we're going to dive into some of the new capabilities, some of the new authenticators, net new authenticators, new capabilities with existing authenticators, and some of the ramifications of that as it relates to just existing user experience, as well as in particular, if you have any custom integrations around authenticator management. My name is Brent Arrington. I will be your host through the proceedings today. I'm also joined by a number of members of my illustrious team. These are the real brains of the operation, and they will be here to help us handle any questions that may come up during the session. So we will try to make sure we leave time for Q&A as we go through the session. As always, there may be forward-looking statements in the presentation, so I'll throw up the ubiquitous safe harbor disclaimer here. And just quickly, the agenda for today. So we're going to start out with just a brief intro and overview. We'll talk about authenticators as it relates to authenticator enrollment policies, impact on recovery flows. We'll discuss some of the new authenticators and new capabilities for existing authenticators. We'll go through the API impacts of that, including some new APIs that are available. As I said, we will try and leave time for Q&A, and then if there's time, we'll go through some handy resources that are available to you out there. One just housekeeping thing around the Q&A. You should see on your Zoom screen a link for Q&A in the Zoom chat itself, or in the Zoom webinar itself. Please, as we go through the content, if you have questions, post those in the Q&A section. And my colleagues will help me kind of curate those, and we'll get those all queued up to address either live at the end of the presentation or in line in the Q&A during the presentation. If there are any questions that we don't have time to cover during the presentation today, we'll make sure that we get a transcript of those posted to our webinar office hours hub on the community site, so that we have a record of those and we can address all of those. All right. So as far as today's session, as I said, this is the latest in our Foundations of OIE series. This session is focused on authenticators. If you've missed any of the previous sessions, you can find those in our YouTube channel. In fact, actually, while I'm saying that, let me grab the links for those and throw them in the chat window for those of you who are on the webinar live. Let me see, where's my chat window? Here we go. So for those of you who are on with us live, I just posted a series of links there, one of which is our YouTube channel. You can find all the previous sessions in this mini-series, as well as all of our OIE meetups, the recordings of them in that YouTube channel. This recording will also be there in about a week or so, as are all the others. Our next session after today will be in May, coming up at the end of May on the 29th. That one will focus on the policy framework changes in OIE. For today, authenticators in OIE. So just some general high-level changes between OIE and Classic as it relates to authenticators. So number one, there's no longer any distinction between password as sort of the primary authenticator and everything else as MFA. In OIE, everything is just an authenticator, including password. And everything is kind of treated the same from an authenticator standpoint. And we'll see more specifically what that means when we go through some demos in just a bit. Similarly, there's also no distinction between enrollments for recovery purposes versus authentication purposes. So in Classic, if you recall, there's a separation between like a phone number, for example, that you may have registered for recovery flow versus a phone number you might have enrolled for MFA. Those are two completely separate things. You can have them be two completely different phone numbers if you wanted to. They could be the same, but they're separate enrollments. Again, that distinction goes away in OIE. Everything is just an authenticator. And again, we'll see what that means in a practical sense in just a bit. There also are some new authenticators that are supported, namely FastPass, which is a new authentication method under the umbrella of the Okta Verify app. There are also some new capabilities and behaviors for existing authenticators, which we'll see, specifically around Okta Verify, FIDO2, and the phone factors. And we'll see a demo of some of the practical ramifications of that in just a little bit to give you an idea of the API impact and SDK impact. I see that we have a hand raised. If you have a question, if you could post that in the Q&A, and we'll get to that in the order that they're submitted. For enrollment policies. So again, as I kind of hinted at, enrollment policies in OIE apply to all authenticators, and that includes password when you get to OIE. And we'll see a demo of this in just a bit, but there's actually one particular OIE acknowledgement item that is called out specifically for this reason, and we'll see the ramifications of that in just a bit. But your policies are going to apply to every authenticator, including password, once you get to OIE. Also, the enrollment policies apply not only to authenticators that are used for your authentication flows, they also apply for authenticators that might be used for recovery flows. And this is another case where sometimes customers who are upgrading to OIE have users that will see some, I guess, unexpected prompts to enroll in authenticators, not because they don't have enough authenticators to satisfy their authentication policies, but because recovery policies that may be set are using specific authenticators to either initiate or verify those flows that they may not have enrolled, and that's what's triggering the prompt. And we'll touch on that here in just a bit. And then one of the other big changes is that in addition to password now being governed by your enrollment policies, password can now be either optional or completely disabled. So you can create fully passwordless users, not just passwordless flows, but actually users that don't even have a password or not even allowed to have a password if you choose. In addition, I kind of touched on this, but for recovery, there are now additional ways that you can initiate recovery flows. So in Classic, you basically can either initiate a recovery flow either through an email or through a code that would be sent either via SMS or text. That's pretty much the only way to initiate a recovery flow in Classic. In OIE, you have more ways that you can initiate those flows. So there are actually a couple of different ways that you can manage this that we'll look at in just a second. But with the sort of legacy password recovery policy way of managing things, you still have additional authenticators that you can use to initiate those flows. So in addition to the phone factors and email, you can also use an Okta Verify push notification or an OTP through Google Authenticator to initiate the flow. And then for the additional verification in Classic, you basically only had one option. It was either security question for the initial additional verification or nothing at all. In OIE, you can still use security question, or you can still not require additional verification, but you also have the option to allow for any enrolled authenticator that's used for authentication purposes to act as that additional authenticator. So instead of relying on just a security question, you could, initiate the flow through, say, Okta Verify push notification, and then verify that flow, or provide the additional verification with, a FIDO2, WebAuthn, et cetera. And then there's also, in addition to the recovery policy, the password recovery policy settings, there's a new mechanism for managing not just the recovery policy requirements, but all end user account management requirements. There's a dedicated policy called the Okta Account Management Policy that we'll look at that you can also use to manage those flows as well. So let's dive out of the slides for just a bit here, and let's move over into our dashboard. And let me, wait, I'm still logged in here. Okay, yes, good deal. All right, so the first thing I want to do is, so I'm going to demonstrate some of the impact of the fact that password is now included in your enrollment policy. So I've created an enrollment policy. So under Authenticators, and enrollment. I've created this enrollment policy called password do not enroll. And if we look at this policy, you can see I've got password set to required. I've got everything else set to optional. But the key thing I want to point out here is that I have a rule that is saying enrollment is denied. Now, for those of you who are still on Classic, if you have any enrollment policies where you have the option set to do not enroll under the rule, and the terminology is a little bit different. Like if we look at this, the terminology here is a little bit different. You would see challenge at first login, challenge at like first time challenge from FA, or do not enroll. But if you have do not enroll selected when you upgrade, it's going to translate to this denied. And what will happen is when you upgrade to OIE, if you have any policy set like that, that's going to apply not just to your additional like MFA authenticators, but password is going to get pulled into that as well when you upgrade. So if that policy is scoped to a group of users who needs to enroll a password, then they could encounter some issues. So I'm going to demonstrate what that would look like here in just a bit. So let me, I created this group, password enroll test, to assign this policy to. I'm going to create a new user. I'm going to call this password enroll test 2. And I'm going to assign this user to my group. Whoops. There we go. So that they will be subject to that policy. And I'm going to activate this user now. I'm not going to set the password. I'm going to send them the activation email and force them to enroll their own password. All right, so that is sent. While I'm waiting for that email to arrive, I want to go back. I want to point out one more thing about this policy. So if I go back and look at that enrollment policy, again, I have password set to require, everything else is set to optional. There is an early access feature flag for email, and specifically, here we go. Here we go. Where are we? Here we go. This one here. So this is one that you will see both in Classic and OIE. For those of you who are used to the Classic behavior in OIE around email optional, this is one that we recommend that you always turn on before you upgrade. This will allow you to keep as close to the same behavior for the optional setting in OIE as possible. There are, I guess, some circumstances where the behavior is a little bit different, even with this feature flag on, and the use case that I'm about to show you is actually one of those cases. So with this feature flag turned on, in most cases, when you set email to optional, it truly is optional, like it will not auto-enroll the email. However, if your activation flow involves actually verifying the email, as it will in my case, because I'm getting an activation link sent to my email that I have to click on, the action of clicking on that link is verifying my email address as a legitimate email. So in that situation, we do go ahead and enroll the authenticator, and you'll see the impact of that here in just a second. It actually makes the flow a little less of a roadblock given the policy situation that I set up for myself. So if I switch over now and go to my end user, let me switch my sharing here, and let me go to, where is my Safari? Here we go. All right, so here I'm going to go to my email, and I should have received a welcome link. So this is my activation link here for the new user that I just created. So I'm going to click on activate the account. Now you'll notice it takes me directly into my Okta dashboard. So I am authenticated. I authenticated via an email authenticator that was automatically enrolled for me. And again, that's based on the fact that the activation link itself verified my email address. So it enrolled an email authenticator for me and used that email authenticator to authenticate me to the dashboard, which has a policy that only requires a single authenticator. So that's why I was able to get here to the dashboard with no problems. But remember that I have a policy set that says denied for enrollment. And I need, in order to access my end user settings, I need 2 authenticators, not just one. So when I try to go to my settings, I'm going to get an error here. Now, this is actually a little misleading. We're not getting denied here because we're not assigned the app. We're actually getting denied here because we need a second authenticator, but our policy says deny and do not allow me to enroll the authenticator. So now if I go back and remove myself from that group so that I'm no longer subject to that policy, let me go back to my admin console here. I'll go back to that user. Here's my user. I'm going to remove them from this group. So that will remove that kind of problematic policy that I have applied to this user. Now, if I go back and go to Safari and go to my end user screen, where are you, Safari? Here we go. So let's try this one more time. If I go back here and now it's prompting me to authenticate because the end user settings screen requires 2 authenticators. So it's prompting me to authenticate with first the one authenticator that I already have enrolled, which is the email. So I'm going to have it send me an email. And hopefully that won't take too long to come through. It's always fun waiting for email authenticators. Come on. Go back and do this again. There we go. Here's our email code. So let's grab this. We could also just click on the link as well. Actually, let's just do that. That was the one that I was impatient in. Here we go. Let's try this. Sorry, my email delivery is getting very slow here. Okay, let's try this. Let's just completely log out here. And now let's sign back in. Let's password roll 2. All right, here we go. That came through a little quicker this time. Actually, let's show this one. Here we go. Now, because I changed the policy, it is now prompting me to set up a password. So now I'm allowed to enroll a password. I'm in, and now if I go to my settings, I no longer get that unassigned prompt. I'm allowed to go into my settings screen because I was able to enroll the second authenticator and then use that to authenticate. So you have to be careful with those policies, especially the do not enroll setting in Classic, or denied is what it translates to in OIE, because it can impact users' ability to enroll a password in addition to other authenticators. So you can get some kind of strange results there if you're not careful. So before I move back into the slides, I also want to show you, I go back over to my admin console. I also want to show you the recovery policy. So in addition to the authenticator enrollment policies being operative on passwords, the recovery policies can also come into play. So if we go back and take a peek at authenticators, if you look at some of the authenticators like phone, for example, certain authenticators can be used for either both authentication and recovery, or only in recovery. But regardless, all of these are subject to the enrollment policies. And if we look at specifically our password authenticator, this is where all of your password policies will migrate when you get to OIEs. They're under the password authenticator. And for our, actually, do this and add a rule. So for our recovery settings, you've got a couple of options here as far as how you manage the recovery capabilities for your password policies. So you can either use the new method, which is the Okta account management policy, which I'll show you in just a second, or you can do this in line here in this rule. And when you choose this, like to manage it here in this rule, you've got additional options for how you can initiate the recovery flow. So you can choose to initiate with Okta Verify, phone, either SMS or voice, email, Google Authenticator. And then for the additional verification, whereas before it was only not required or security question, now you can choose any enrolled authenticator that you could use for MFA or SSO to provide the additional verification. Now, the one caveat here that I would note is if you choose this option, whatever authenticator you use to initiate the flow cannot also be used for the additional verification, right? So it has to be two different authenticators. So if I use Okta Verify push to initiate my recovery flow, I cannot use Okta Verify push for the additional verification. I would have to use an additional, like a different authenticator for that. So if you're going with this setup for the additional verification, you want to make sure that your enrollment policies are set up in such a way that users will have enrolled in at least two non-password authenticators in order to satisfy that flow. Now, the other option is to use this Okta account management policy to manage this flow, and that is going to be located under your authentication policies. There's this specific policy that is called out here under your authentication policies. And this is used to manage not just the initial authenticator enrollment, but this is also managing ongoing end user account management policies. So by default, there is a catch-all rule that you'll see, which has this ability to do like progressive authentication, basically. So if you only have a single authenticator enrolled, that will suffice to enroll the second authenticator. And then once you have two authenticators, if you've got a two authenticator requirement in your policy, then it will actually enforce that. So you can either use this policy, which is basically the same construct as your other app level sign-in policies. It's just this applies specifically to all end user account management screens. So you can either choose to use that to manage your initial onboarding and authenticator enrollments, or you can manage it sort of the legacy way in line in the recovery policies as well. All right. So with that, let me jump back. I'm going to go back to my where is my? Here we go. All right. So let's go back here. The next thing I want to talk about are some of the new capabilities. Well, first of all, the new authenticator, which is FastPass, and some of the new capabilities that are available in existing authenticators. So we've had a number of webinars where we've talked about FastPass. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on that here today, but FastPass is essentially a new authentication method under the Okta Verify umbrella. It's a phishing-resistant, device-bound, hardware-protected, PKI-based authenticator. In sort of conjunction with that, and another new thing about Okta Verify and OIE is that you can have multiple devices enrolled for the same user. So in Classic, you were limited to one device enrollment. Technically speaking, you were limited to one Okta Verify enrollment per user in Classic. There were ways to kind of hack that if you manually input the seed value, but that's a different story. But now Okta Verify natively supports multiple enrollments. And this can have some impact that we'll see in just a bit around using the Factors API for existing custom integrations. You can have multiple devices for Okta Verify. FIDO2 authenticators, you can now define authenticator groups. So you can define like specific targeted FIDO2 authenticator types that you want to allow for enrollment. FIDO2 WebAuthn is a very big umbrella. It covers a lot of different authenticators, but the authenticator groups let you get very specific about exactly what specific FIDO2 authenticators you want to allow, and you can target that in your enrollment policies for specific groups of users. Additionally, we have a new devices SDK. So you can use this new SDK to basically incorporate a custom push authenticator into your own mobile applications. So it's essentially like your own homegrown version of Okta Verify Push built into your own mobile applications. And it functions not only as an authenticator, but it also registers the device and captures some native device context for the device that has it enrolled as well. So we'll show you what that looks like in just a bit. And finally, for the phone authenticators, there's some new behaviors there. Number one, there's no longer a separation from an enrollment standpoint anyway between SMS and voice. It's all just phone. And then at the time of challenge is when the user would select how they want to receive the code. And then you can also have multiple enrollments now per user. So instead of being limited to one SMS and potentially one voice per user, you can now have multiple enrollments for the same user. As I kind of alluded to, these changes do have impacts on some of the legacy APIs, the Factors API in particular. So if you have built custom screens using the Factors API for end users to manage their enrollments, there will be some impact of some of these changes. So number one, obviously FastPass would not be supported through the Factors API. The authenticators group or the authenticator groups functionality for WebAuthn FIDO2 is not supported. Importantly, there would not be support for multiple Okta Verify enrollments per user or multiple phone enrollments per user. And we'll see, I guess, firsthand what that looks like here in just a second. And then finally, the custom push authenticator is not available through the Factors API. There are some new APIs, however, to help account for those, and we'll kind of dive into the documentation on these in a little more detail. But there's a new API called My Account API. This is an API for all sorts of end user management screens. It's basically this is the new API to use if you're building your own homegrown end user management screens. This covers authenticators, and it covers some of the new functionality for existing authenticators, as well as some other things around managing an account as well. But for today's purposes, we'll focus on the authenticators. There's also a sign-in experience management API that has a authenticator enrollment endpoint that you can direct users to that will give them a UI to enroll a specific authenticator based on an authenticator ID that you pass in to the URL. And then you also can include a redirect URI that will then take them to the destination of your choosing after they've completed that enrollment. So it's an easy way to incorporate authenticator enrollment into your custom flows without having to build out the screens yourself. So with that, let's get away from the slides again and actually jump back into the product. So I'm going to start in my admin view. And first thing I want to do is, again, we'll go back to Authenticators. And again, as I noted, under OctaVerify, you do have a new option, which is FastPass. You'll see it here as well. Now, for those of you who are still in Classic, you will not see FastPass enabled. You'll see the option here, but it will not be enabled initially when you upgrade to OIE. You would have to come in manually after the fact and enable FastPass if you choose, but that is a new option that's available. I also want to show you the authenticator group. So if we look under the FIDO2 WebAuthn Authenticator, you'll see that there is an option here for authenticator groups. So this is where you would go to define your group. So here we have a group. If we look at this group, we've called out specific authenticators that we are adding to this group. Once you've created a group, and you can add as many groups as you want, but once you've created a group, you can then reference those from your enrollment policy. So if I go and I add a new policy, as I'm going through and either setting each of my authenticators to optional, required, disabled, etc. When I get to FIDO2, I can either allow for any WebAuthn authenticators, or I can target it to specific groups. So you can say, for this enrollment policy, I'm only going to allow this particular subset of FIDO2 authenticators to be enrolled. And you can select multiple groups here. And again, this is at the policy level. So like all policies, this can be targeted to different groups of users, depending on what you want to allow for those groups. And then also you'll notice there is I have a custom authenticator here. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on all the steps to build this up because it would take too much time, but basically there's an ability now to create a custom push authenticator where you build this into your own native mobile app. So you would set up your messaging services either through for Android or for Apple. You set up your messaging services. You would tie this to a particular OIDC app that you're using to facilitate these flows. And then you can build this into your own mobile application. You'll notice if I go and look at, devices, so you can see, this is a list of all the devices that have been registered in this org. And you can see like the user that they're associated with. You can see what it was enrolled by. So OctaVerify is the out-of-the-box mechanism for enrolling devices through the FastPass enrollment. But you'll notice I also have some devices that are enrolled through my custom authenticator. So in addition to serving as an authenticator through the push notification, it also can be used to register your devices. And you would get, if we look at the device, you would get some default device posture information through that registration, through the SDK that you could then use in your device assurance policies as you're setting up your enrollment your authentication policies. The other thing I wanted to show you is for phone. If we look at, we go back to authenticators and look at the phone authenticator. So you'll notice here, there's no longer a separation, at least from an enrollment standpoint, between SMS and voice. Everything is just phone. You can choose whether to enable codes being sent through voice and or SMS or both. But from an enrollment standpoint, there's no longer a distinction between those two. It's just phone. And then at the time of challenge is when the user would be asked, how do you want to receive this code? And we're going to see the impact of that here in just a second. So I'm going to show you, I have a user here. This is an OIE tenant, obviously, that we're looking at. I have a user that I created here, Ben Folds, who has multiple phone numbers enrolled. So if I look at, I'm going to reset Authenticator. So I've got multiple phone numbers. I've got 3 phone numbers enrolled for Ben. If I go to a classic styled custom flow using the Factors API and try to retrieve authenticators for this, or factors, I guess, in classic terminology for this user. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to move over to, where is my Postman? There we go. So I'm going to move over to Postman, and I'm going to use the factors API, and I'm going to list all factors for this user. So I've already grabbed Ben's user ID. So I'm going to send a request to retrieve all factors for this user. And we just saw we have 3 factors enrolled. We've got 3 different phone factors enrolled. But when I do this through the factors API, I'm getting 1 factor here. It's a call factor, so voice call factor. There's one of my numbers. Here's a second one. This one is listed as SMS. There's my number, and that's it. So I'm only getting 2 of my 3 phone factors enrolled. And again, that's because the factors API is not built to understand the fact that you can have more than just a single SMS and or a single voice call phone factor. So in order to rectify that, I need to use the My Accounts API. So I'm going to go over and grab, oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. I'm going to go over and grab a access token for Ben. This is just a very simple glitch app that I use to grab tokens and print them out. So I'm going to grab my access token here, and I'm going to take this back over to Postman. And first off, let me set my access token here. And then I'm going to go over to the My Accounts API, and I'm going to use the Get My Phones endpoint with that access token. And again, this access token is scoped to the user that I want, like because I logged in with that user ID. So the API call is scoped based on the access token, which is tied to my user Ben Folds. So here I can see now I've got 1 and 2 and all 3 of my numbers. Now, in addition to being created to understand that you can have multiple, more than just the 1 SMS and 1 voice call, it's also the authentication mechanism for this API is different. The factors API is an admin authentication, so you would use either an admin SSWS token, or you could use an OAuth flow and an admin bearer token for that as well. But in any event, it would be an admin who would be authenticating to make that call. The My Accounts API is designed to be built for end users specifically, so you would actually incorporate this into your end user authentication flow and make sure that you include these scopes. So if I look at that app, where's my Safari? If I look at the app there that we were using for this, it is here. Basically, I just need to make sure that when I'm making my when I'm configuring my widget or JavaScript call to get my tokens for that app, I just want to make sure that I'm including the necessary My Accounts scopes that are needed to perform the functions that I'm trying to do with that access token, and you can then pass that in for your authentication to the My Accounts API. All right. So the next thing I want to show you is, so we kind of touched on the My Accounts API, or we show like one tiny piece of what it can do. The full documentation for that can be found here. Let me go where. So the full documentation for My Accounts API is here. That should also be in the link that was posted earlier in the chat window. I'll post this again here for anybody who may have arrived late. But your full documentation is here. The other thing that I touched on, I don't have a demo for this for today, but there is also this sign-in experience management endpoint, and in particular, the end user enrollments. So there is an ability to either enroll or unenroll an authenticator. And basically what this does is it allows you to pass in, like direct the browser with an authenticated user to a specific endpoint that references an authenticator ID and then a redirect URL. And that will present the specific screen for that authenticator for the user to enroll in just that authenticator. And then after completion, it will redirect that user to the redirect URI parameter that you specified. That works for both enrolling a single authenticator as well as unenrolling a single authenticator. So this one, I'll drop this link in the chat window as well for anyone who missed it earlier. All right. So with that, I see we have about 20 minutes left. I am going to pause here and let's see if we have any questions in our Q&A. Where is our Q&A? Here we go. All right, looks like we have some that have already been answered. We've got one. Let's see, here we go. Looks like, Marshall, looks like you have a follow-up question. Do you mind if I unmute you and let you ask your question live? Is that okay? Let's see, All right, you should be able to unmute now, Marshall.
Yeah, it looks like I was able to. So, and I'm starting to think through this now, but in Classic, I was able to set up an enrollment policy that said, hey, these are our approved authenticators, right? Mm-hmm. And we're going to force you to enroll in one of them, but not require any one specifically, right? Which we can't necessarily do in OIE as far as I can tell. Yeah, now you can do this via authentication policies in an application specifically, but if they were to log into the portal the first time, it wouldn't force them to enroll one of the secondary factors, right? So we have, we can, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So actually, it's actually the same behavior. It just looks different in Classic because password is now pulled into the policies. So if I go, let me go back into my admin console where I've got too many windows. This is not the right one. Maybe this one. Here we go. Yeah, if I go back into my admin console. So in if you look at your authentication policies in Classic, you'll notice that password is not represented anywhere in there.
Right. Yeah, I do remember that.
But password is always required in OIE. Right. So that's why. So there is always there's always a requirement to have one authenticator that's sort of a bootstrap authenticator that's required. That could either be password or it could be email in OIE. But the reason it looks different to you in OIE is because now password is actually reflected here in the enrollment policy, whereas before it was still required. Sure. It's just you didn't see it in the policy. So you kind of, yeah, go ahead.
I do understand that, right? So now you have a required password and your optional authenticators below that. So yes. What I don't see is where when you add a rule here to say, on your first login, I want to force you, you already have your password that you have to use, but I also want to force one of these optional authenticators.
Right. And so
that's what I'm not seeing.
Right. So that's what I was saying when in my answers to you is you can force it based on the per app policy. So you can keep it this way. So you can have password as required and then leave the other ones in optional. But when then you go into your per app policies and you say, hey, I want you to use password plus one of the others, it will force them at the time of login to use one of the ones they choose. So in this instance, like Brent has, depending on what he chooses, they'll be asked to do password, then they have to set up either FastPass, FIDO, or if you lower the restrictions, you can set up other things, right? So now they're able to do other things. So that at the time of login is when you can force them to log into or force them to enroll into something they want to enroll in, whatever it is they feel comfortable enrolling in.
Understand that, but if they went directly to an application, right, that would work.
But you can do that in the
So you would have
dashboard
to set that
policy.
up on the dashboard, right? You would have
Right,
to
yeah,
go into the
yeah.
dashboard and put that in.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is an application. So your end user dashboard, your end user settings screen, your admin dashboard. Even there's even
Right.
a separate app for the hold on, let me go back. There's even a separate app for like the plugin, the browser plugin. So everything now you can have a policy defined for it. So no matter where they land, you can set the requirements there.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? If anybody has any questions at this point, if you just raise your hand, I can, or if you're comfortable speaking live on the webinar, you can just raise your hand and we can unmute you or allow you to unmute and you can ask your question. Or if you're more comfortable just typing it into the Q&A, that's fine as well. I guess for Rashir and Andy, were there any questions that may have already been answered in the Q&A that would be good to highlight live during the session? Or
there was a question from Chiseng Lee. I'm sorry if I'm not saying that correctly. But if you want to raise your hand, we can try to answer that live. Or I know you set up a one-on-one office hour with us. So okay, hold on, let me see.
Yeah. Where are there you go. You should be able to unmute.
Yeah, hi Brent. Hi Rashir. Thanks for looking at my question. So Brent, if you can go to Authenticators, and I'll explain. So what we can see here is name, factor type, characteristic, and status, and we got the 4 columns there. When I compare my tenant, my OIE tenant, to our group company tenant, our group company tenant has a used for column between characteristics and status. There is a difference that's in my tenant, I'm a super admin, and clearly I can then view actions and look at more details, whereas in the parent tenant, I'm only a read-only admin. And so initially support thought it was down to the role that because we wouldn't be able to see actions, we would have a used for column. So yes, thanks for sharing. I did set up a meeting, and I've just was replying with some screenshots, which do have our tenant details, which I don't want to disclose over the call. So I'll send that over the.
Yeah, I'm not sure why I'm not seeing that column. It could be, so I don't know if your tenant is in a preview environment or in production. This is preview.
It's both preview and production. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I don't know. I've actually never noticed that.
Yeah, because we so when I look at the table that I can see, we find that's actually a quite useful column to have, irrespective of what role you have, because you can then in this sort of single pane of glass see that, okay, I've got email registered and I'm using it for authentication and recovery. Google Authenticator, I'm going to use it for recovery, for instance, as examples. So it's actually nice to see with my read-only view in my group company's tenant, I can see that. Rashir might be able to see that in the, I've just replied to the email invite. So
yeah, I don't know. I'm logged in as a super admin here, so I don't. So you were saying you see all of these 4 plus a 5th column, or you see?
Yeah, when logged in as a read-only admin in our group company tenant, I see 5 columns, but as a read-only admin in my own tenant, I only see 4. So it feels like something's missing or something needs to be enabled or configured. And I have logged a ticket with support and had a call with them today, and they're equally puzzled.
That may just be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rashir.
No, I was going to say, I was going to share that email with you after this and have a conversation, because I've not seen that before either.
Yeah, I suspect this is just a UI difference for the read-only admin specifically. I don't know if I have a read-only.
So, but we created a new read-only admin and in affected tenants, and we can't see it, on the impacted tenants.
Okay.
There is a difference between one was upgraded 3 years ago and ours have just been upgraded. So I don't know if there was slight differences in the upgrades, or maybe something was enabled specially for our group company rather than our regional tenants.
Yeah, we'll have to investigate this. I'd
Okay.
still like you to keep your one-on-one office hour with me, and we'll
Okay,
try
will
to
do.
investigate it from there.
All right, thanks for sharing. We'll speak to you
Yeah.
next week then.
No worries.
All right. Any other questions from anyone? You can either raise your hand, or if you want to type it in the Q&A. In the meantime, while we're waiting for other questions, I will actually, hang on. Okay, yeah, we see someone who sees the fifth column as well, and they're seeing it as a super admin. Okay, yeah, it may just be some. There may be like a feature flag potentially that's not turned on or something, but yeah, there, particularly in preview environments, there can be some differences in.
What I was hearing was that it's only as a read-only admin that you can't see that.
No, but
No.
we have another user saying they can see it as a super admin, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. Let's see where.
John, are you saying you have a question?
Okay.
You wanted to ask live? If you want to raise your hand, we'll allow you to talk. Thank you.
Oh no, I was just going off of anonymous if you wanted to follow up directly.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions from anyone? So while we're waiting, if anyone has any other questions, I will point out just a couple things. One, for those of you who have not yet upgraded OIE, just a quick reminder that it is a self-service upgrade. You should see, if you log in as a super admin and your tenant, you should see a big scary schedule upgrade button at the top of your admin dashboard. Don't worry, that doesn't do anything immediately. The first step is it takes you through an eligibility check. It'll call out any items that either need to be brought to your attention with links to documentation around those, or if there are any configuration changes that need to be made, it'll call those out. And then once you've either acknowledged or satisfied any config changes, only then will it allow you to schedule a date and time that you want to upgrade your tenant. If you have any questions about any of that, please take advantage of the office hour sessions. We're happy to walk through any of those items with you to give you additional explanation or help you through that process. On that note, some resources that are available to you if you have not upgraded yet. So there is an OIE upgrade resource hub. The QR code here should take you to that link. You'll find links to knowledge base articles, links to our community site where you can register for office hours. You'll also see updates about these webinars. You'll get registration links to those there. And then also when those recordings are available, we usually post those there as well. And you'll find a link to our YouTube playlist where all of our previous webinar recordings live. There's a knowledge base upgrade hub. You'll find detailed information here on the eligibility tasks, the specific eligibility items that may or may not be called out. Feature changes. There's also a sample upgrade test plan there that you can use to kind of guide you as you set up your test plan for upgrading. For those of you who have customizations, there's a OIE upgrade developer hub under the developer site. Again, QR code should take you there. This will go through API changes, new SDKs available in OIE, information around the sign-in widget and the upgrade, as well as other developer resources and developer test strategies. Our community site, again, I highly recommend y'all bookmark this one. This is where you can sign up for one-on-one office hour sessions with one of us to kind of talk through any questions or concerns you may have. You'll also find updates around upcoming events like these webinars, as well as when we have recordings of these sessions posted. And finally, our YouTube playlist, where you'll see all the previous recordings of these sessions, as well as other videos that are specifically OIE targeted. And with that, we do have another session upcoming next month. That'll be on the 29th of May. Hopefully that QR code is accurate. I saw a note somewhere that we had a bad QR code somewhere. Let's see if this one is the same. It may be wrong. Hold on. Let's see. No, that's the right one. So for the next session, this one should take you to the right place to register for next month's deep dive, which is going to focus on policy framework changes in OIE. It'll be on the 29th at 1 Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. So we hope to see you all there. With that, let's do one last check of the questions. Are there any other questions from anyone before we wrap up for today? All right. If not, we can wrap up a few minutes early. Thanks everyone again for your attendance. Hope to see you next time. Andy, Rashir, thanks for helping out as always. And we will see you again on the next session. Thanks everyone.